The vast darkness of space enveloped the Imperial flagship, Vanguard, as it hovered at the edge of the Sol system. Commander Lyra Voss stood on the observation deck, her slender figure silhouetted against the distant pinprick of blue-green light that was Earth. The planet was beautiful, even from this distance, deceptively so, if the ancient Zharn transmissions were to be believed. "Commander," a voice called from behind her. "High Command is ready for your briefing." Lyra turned, her silver-gray eyes reflecting the starlight. At 38, she was young for her rank, but 15 years of exemplary service had accelerated her advancement through the Imperial Expeditionary Fleet. Her short, dark hair was neatly trimmed to regulation length, and her uniform bore the distinguished medals of the Proxima and Centauri campaigns. "Thank you, Lieutenant," she replied, smoothing the front of her uniform. "I'll be right there." As she walked through the gleaming corridors of the Vanguard, Lyra mentally reviewed the information about Earth. For centuries, the Empire had monitored the planet from a distance, tracking its rich resources, rare minerals, abundant water, and unique biological specimens. Now, with the Empire's expansion stretching resources thin, High Command had finally authorized an expedition to claim Earth for the glory of the Empire. But there were complications. The briefing chamber was already filled when Lyra arrived. Admirals and commanders from throughout the fleet were present, either in person or via holographic projection. At the head of the table sat Admiral Rao, his weathered face a map of battles fought and won across the stars. Unlike Lyra, who had risen through merit and strategic thinking, Rao was old imperial aristocracy, born to command, and unwilling to brook dissent. "Commander Voss," Rao acknowledged with a curt nod. "You have concerns about the mission parameters?" Lyra stood at attention. "Yes, Admiral. I believe we should reconsider our approach to Earth." A murmur ran through the assembled officers. "The Zharn transmissions," Lyra continued. "Ancient alien folklore," interrupted Rao dismissively. "Hardly a basis for military strategy." Lyra activated the central display terminal. A series of fragmented transmissions appeared, translated from the complex pictographic language of the now extinct Zharn. "With respect, Admiral, the Zharn were an advanced civilization. These messages were broadcast across multiple star systems as a warning." She highlighted specific passages. "Stay away from Earth. Death awaits. The planet protects itself. We were destroyed." "The transmissions are over 500 years old," countered Admiral Rao. "Whatever threats the Zharn encountered are likely long gone. Our scans show only primitive human settlements. Their most advanced weapons would be useless against our shields." Lyra switched the display to show the timeline of Zharn communications. The final transmissions came just before their civilization collapsed. Their fleet was significantly more advanced than ours when they attempted to colonize Earth. Admiral Rao's patience was visibly thinning. "Commander, the Empire requires Earth's resources. The decision has been made. Your job is to execute the mission, not question it." Lyra knew when to retreat. She had made her case, but the imperial doctrine of expansion would not be swayed by ancient warnings. "Understood, Admiral. I will prepare the advanced scouts for deployment immediately." As the officers filed out of the briefing room, Tarek Sol, the fleet's chief xenolinguist, approached Lyra, tall and thin with dark skin and thoughtful eyes. Tarek had spent years studying the Zharn language and culture. "They're making a mistake," he said quietly. "The Zharn weren't given to exaggeration or superstition. If they warned against Earth, they had a reason." Lyra glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "I know, but orders are orders. All we can do now is proceed with caution." Tarek's face was troubled. "I've been working on some of the more obscure Zharn transmissions. There's mention of something called the heartbeat, some kind of defense mechanism, but the references are cryptic." "Keep working on it," Lyra said. "And Tarek, be discreet." The xenolinguist nodded and departed, leaving Lyra alone with her thoughts. She turned back to the observation window, gazing at the distant Earth. There was something about the ancient warnings that haunted her, a sense of dread she couldn't shake. 24 hours later, the first scout ship disappeared. The craft had been approaching Earth's upper atmosphere when communications abruptly ceased. No distress signal, no debris field, nothing to indicate what had happened. Lyra was in the command center when the report came in. She immediately ordered a full scan of the planet and surrounding space, but the results showed nothing unusual. Could it have been a technical malfunction? Suggested Lieutenant Commander Janice Kwan, the Vanguard's chief engineer. Compact and efficient in both movement and speech, Janice had an unparalleled understanding of Imperial technology. "Unlikely," Lyra replied. "The Pathfinder was our newest scout vessel, with redundant systems for every critical function." Before they could speculate further, a communication officer called out, "Commander, we're receiving a transmission. Weak signal. Unknown origin." "Put it through," Lyra ordered. Static filled the command center speakers, gradually resolving into a rhythmic pattern. Within the static, barely audible, was a voice, not human, not Imperial, but unmistakably Sharn. "Cannot win. Earth defends. Pulse coming. Too late." The message repeated once before dissolving back into static. Tarek, who had been summoned to the command center, looked pale. "That's a Sharn distress beacon, but it's impossible. They've been extinct for centuries." "Could it be automated?" Lyra asked. "Possibly," Tarek replied. "But why activate now? And how has it survived this long?" Lyra made a decision. "I'm requesting permission to postpone the main landing. We need to investigate this." Admiral Rao was predictably unmoved by the development. His holographic image flickered with irritation as Lyra presented her findings. A ghost signal and one missing scout ship? Hardly sufficient reason to delay a strategic operation of this magnitude, he said. "The second wave of scouts will deploy in 6 hours, followed by the main landing party. That is all, Commander." The transmission ended before Lyra could protest. "He's going to get people killed," Janice muttered. Lyra's expression hardened. "Not if I can help it. Janice, I need you to modify our sensor array to scan for any unusual energy patterns around Earth. Tarek, continue working on those Sharn transmissions. Anything about defense systems, weapons, anything that could explain what happened to the Pathfinder." "And what will you do?" asked Janice. Lyra's eyes reflected the determination that had defined her career. "I'm going to prepare a contingency plan." The second wave of scouts departed as scheduled. 3 ships, each carrying a crew of 5, descended toward Earth in a standard reconnaissance pattern. Lyra watched from the Vanguard's command center, tension evident in her rigid posture. The scouts maintained regular communication as they entered the upper atmosphere, reporting nothing unusual. Then, as they passed the 80-kilometer mark, everything changed. "Command, this is Horizon," came the voice of the lead scout pilot, suddenly strained. "We're experiencing... What is that? There's something... Wait, that's impossible." "Horizon, report," Lyra commanded. "What are you seeing?" "It's beautiful," the pilot whispered. "The lights. Can you see them? They're calling to me." Beside him, another crew member began screaming incoherently. "Horizon, return to orbit immediately," Lyra ordered. "All scouts, abort mission." But it was too late. On the view screen, Lyra watched in horror as the Horizon suddenly veered off course, accelerating toward Earth's surface at dangerous speed. "They're going to crash," Janice said, her voice tight. The second scout ship, the Venture, began transmitting frantic communications. "Command, our pilot He just opened the airlock. He walked out. We can't. The controls aren't responding. Something's in our heads." The third scout maintained radio silence, but its erratic flight pattern, suggested similar chaos aboard. Within minutes, all 3 scouts had crashed. No survivors. The command center was silent, the horror of what they had just witnessed sinking in. "It was some kind of psychic assault," Tarek said finally. "The Jarn mentioned something like this, a defense that attacks the mind." Admiral Rao's response was swift and predictable. Rather than retreat, he ordered a full dreadnought to advance, the Imperator, a massive warship capable of orbital bombardment. "If there's a defense system, we'll destroy it from orbit," he declared. "No planetary weapon can stand against the Imperator's firepower." Lyra watched with growing dread as the massive warship moved into position. The Imperator was the pride of the fleet, a kilometers-long behemoth, bristling with weaponry capable of reducing entire continents to ash. For 12 hours, the Imperator conducted scans of the planet's surface, focusing on unusual energy signatures detected around what appeared to be a human settlement. A sprawling metropolis they identified as New Chicago from intercepted communications. Then, without warning, the Imperator's systems began to fail. "Commander," called a communications officer, "the Imperator is reporting complete sensor blackout. They're blind." Before Lyra could respond, another report came in. "Engine failures across all decks. The Imperator is losing orbital stability." Lyra watched as the massive dreadnought began to drift, its position deteriorating minute by minute. If it fell into the atmosphere at the wrong angle, the resulting destruction would devastate not only the ship, but potentially large portions of Earth's surface. "Dispatch tugs," she ordered. "Stabilize the Imperator's orbit." For the next several hours, the fleet worked frantically to prevent the dreadnought from falling to Earth. When it was finally stabilized, the Imperator's captain reported that all major systems had simultaneously malfunctioned, an occurrence so statistically improbable that it could only be the result of sabotage or unknown external interference. In an emergency council called by Admiral Rao, opinions were divided. Some officers advocated immediate withdrawal from the Sol system. Others, led by Rao himself, argued for an overwhelming show of force, a full-scale invasion with all available troops and ships. "We cannot allow an inferior civilization to defy the Empire," Rao thundered. "Whatever defense system they possess, it can be overcome with sufficient firepower." Lyra stood. "Admiral, with respect, we don't understand what we're facing. These aren't conventional weapons. The evidence suggests some kind of psychic attack that can disable both our people and our technology. We need more information before we commit our forces." "What do you propose, Commander?" Rao asked coldly. "A small, covert team," Lyra replied. "Land away from major energy signatures, investigate the nature of the defense system, and if possible, find a way to neutralize it before we attempt a full-scale landing." Rao considered this. "You have 24 hours, Commander. After that, we proceed with the invasion as planned." It was less time than Lyra had hoped for, but it was something. As the council dispersed, she began assembling her team. Tarek was an obvious choice for his knowledge of the Jarn warnings. Janice would be essential for understanding and potentially disabling any technological aspects of the defense system. Lyra also selected 3 of her most trusted security officers, veterans who had served with her in previous campaigns and could be counted on to maintain discipline under pressure. They departed in a small, unmarked shuttle, using a stealth approach to avoid detection. Rather than heading for the energy signature near New Chicago, Lyra directed the shuttle toward a remote area thousands of kilometers away, a mountainous region where Imperial scans had detected minimal human activity. The descent was tense but uneventful. Either they had managed to avoid the defense system's attention, or it was focused elsewhere. They landed in a secluded valley, the shuttle's adaptive camouflage rendering it nearly invisible against the landscape. Earth's gravity was slightly stronger than Imperial standard, and its atmosphere richer in oxygen. As they emerged from the shuttle, Lyra felt the pleasant weight of the air in her lungs, a reminder that despite its dangers, this was a world teeming with life. "Beautiful," murmured Tarek, gazing at the verdant forest surrounding them. "Hard to believe something so deadly lurks here. The most dangerous predators often hide in paradise," Lyra replied. She activated her scanner. "There's a human settlement 10 kilometers north. Small, primitive, pre-industrial technology levels. We'll observe from a distance." The team moved through the forest with practiced efficiency, their adaptive armor blending with the surroundings. As they approached the settlement, they positioned themselves on a ridge overlooking a collection of simple wooden structures. Humans moved about their daily activities, completely unaware of the observers or the larger fleet poised above their world. "They don't look like a civilization capable of destroying the Imperator," Janice observed. "I don't think it's them," Lyra said. "At least, not directly." She pointed to a stone structure at the center of the village. Unlike the wooden buildings, this one was clearly ancient, weathered and partially overgrown, yet still standing after what must have been centuries or even millennia. And it was familiar. "Tarek," Lyra said quietly. "Does that structure resemble anything from the Jarn records?" The xenolinguist studied it through enhanced optics. "Yes," he replied, his voice hushed with realization. "It's a spire, like the ones described in the later Sharn transmissions. They called them pulse points or heartbeat nodes." "What's its purpose?" asked Janice. "The transmissions weren't clear," Tarek admitted. "But they suggested these structures were part of a network, a planetary defense system that somehow merges technology with something else, something the Jarn couldn't fully comprehend." Lyra made a decision. "We need to get closer. If these spires are the key to the defense system, we need to understand how they work." They waited until nightfall before approaching the village. The primitive humans had retired to their dwellings, leaving the central spire unguarded. Up close, the structure was even more impressive. A seamless column of what appeared to be black stone, rising 20 meters into the air. No visible seams, no signs of construction. It simply was, as though it had grown from the earth itself. Janice ran her scanner over the surface. "This isn't stone," she said. "The material doesn't match anything in our database, and there's energy flowing through it, subtle, but definitely there." Tarek was examining markings at the base of the spire. "These symbols, they're not human. They appear to be a variant of Sharn script, but much older." "Can you read them?" Lyra asked. Tarek traced the symbols with his fingers. "Partially. This appears to be a warning. Something about the pulse and the mind's eye. And here," he pointed to another section. "It mentions wardens or guardians." A sudden noise from the village interrupted them. A human child, no more than 10 years old, stood several meters away, staring at them with wide eyes. Before Lyra could react, Tarek spoke softly in what must have been the local language, a linguistic gift that made him invaluable to the Imperial fleet. The child responded, pointing at the spire and then making a gesture across his forehead. He spoke rapidly, his voice hushed but intense. "What's he saying?" Lyra asked. "He says the stone sings at night," Tarek translated. "It whispers in their dreams and protects them from the empty ones. I think he means outsiders. He says his grandfather is the keeper of the stone's history." Lyra considered this. "Ask if we can speak with his grandfather." After a brief exchange, the child nodded and motioned for them to follow. He led them to one of the larger dwellings at the edge of the village, where an elderly human sat by a small fire. The old man showed no surprise at their appearance. He looked at them with rheumy eyes that nonetheless held a keen intelligence. Through Tarek's translation, they learned that the old man was the village shaman, a keeper of ancient knowledge passed down through generations. He spoke of the spire as one of the Earth's fingers, part of a vast network that spanned the globe. "There are 7 great spires and countless lesser ones. Tarek translated, as the old man spoke. They have been here since before humans walked the earth. They sleep until danger comes from the stars. And then, they awaken to protect the world. Ask him how they protect, Lyra instructed. The old man's response was troubling. They reach into minds, Tarek translated. They find fears and dreams and twist them. They make invaders destroy themselves. Psychic warfare, Janice murmured. That would explain what happened to our scouts. There's more, Tarek continued as the old man spoke. He says the greatest spire lies beneath the city to the east, what we would call New Chicago. It is the heart of the network, the central node that controls all others. This was the breakthrough they needed. If there was a central control point for the defense system, it might be possible to disable it, or at least understand it well enough to protect their forces. Lyra thanked the old man through Tarek. As they prepared to leave, the shaman gripped Lyra's arm with surprising strength. He says to beware the wardens, Tarek translated. They are the guardians who walk between worlds, visible only when the great spires are threatened. Back at the shuttle, Lyra contacted the Vanguard, requesting an immediate audience with Admiral Rao. She detailed their discoveries, emphasizing the central spire beneath New Chicago and the apparent psychic nature of the defense system. This changes nothing, Rao replied, his holographic image stern. If anything, it confirms that we must strike decisively. We will target this central spire with orbital bombardment, then proceed with the landing. Admiral, Lyra protested, we don't know what effect an attack on the central spire might have. The defense system could have fail-safes, countermeasures. Your 24 hours are nearly up, Commander, Rao interrupted. Return to the Vanguard immediately. The bombardment of New Chicago will commence at 800 fleet time. After the transmission ended, Lyra turned to Tarek and Janice. We can't let him do this, not without more information. What are you suggesting? Janice asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. Lyra's expression was resolute. We're going to New Chicago. Now. The journey took 3 hours at maximum speed. They approached the sprawling metropolis from the west, keeping low to avoid detection by both Earth's primitive radar systems and the Imperial fleet above. New Chicago was a study in contrasts. Ancient structures, similar to the village spire, stood alongside crude steel and glass towers built by humans. The city was clearly a center of Earth's nascent industrial civilization, with primitive ground vehicles moving along grid-patterned streets. Tarek's instruments led them to an abandoned structure on the city's outskirts, what appeared to have once been a human place of worship, now overgrown and forgotten. Beneath it, his scans detected a vast chamber extending deep underground. The energy readings are consistent with the village spire, but magnified 100-fold, he reported. This has to be it, the central node. They set down the shuttle in a concealed location and proceeded on foot. The streets were nearly empty in the pre-dawn hours, allowing them to move without detection. Using scanning equipment, they located an entrance to the underground chamber, a sealed doorway hidden behind the altar of the abandoned church. Janice made quick work of the door, revealing a spiral staircase that descended into darkness. The air that wafted up was cool and smelled of earth and something else, something alien and electric. No signs of human presence, Lyra noted as they began their descent. It doesn't appear they even know this is here. The staircase seemed to go on forever, taking them deep beneath the city. Finally, it opened into a vast cavern that took their breath away. Rising from the center of the chamber was a spire identical to the one in the village, but enormous, at least 50 meters tall. Around its base, a complex pattern of what appeared to be circuitry was etched into the stone floor, glowing with a faint blue light. The circuitry extended to the walls of the cavern, where similar, smaller spires emerged, like the teeth of some great beast. But most remarkable of all was the pulse of energy that emanated from the central spire, visible as ripples in the air, like heat haze on a summer day. Each pulse sent a wave of discomfort through Lyra's mind, not painful, but disorienting, as though something was gently probing her thoughts. "The heartbeat," Tarek whispered. "This is what the Jarn were talking about." Janice was already scanning the structure. "It's generating some kind of field, not electromagnetic, not gravitational. Something else. Something our science doesn't have a classification for." "Can you determine its purpose?" Lyra asked. "Not exactly," Janice replied. "But it seems to be both a sensor and a weapon. It detects foreign consciousness and then interfaces with it somehow." Tarek was studying the circuitry patterns on the floor. "These symbols, they're even older than what we saw in the village. This isn't Sharn technology. I think the Sharn discovered it, just as we have." "Then who built it?" Lyra wondered aloud. Before anyone could speculate, a tremor ran through the cavern. Dust rained down from above, and the pulse from the central spire intensified noticeably. "What was that?" Janice asked. Lyra checked her chronometer. "It's 800. The bombardment has begun." The floor beneath them shuddered again, more violently this time. The blue glow of the circuitry patterns brightened, and the pulse from the spire increased in frequency. "We need to get out of here," Lyra said urgently. "Now!" But it was too late. As they turned to flee, the central spire emitted a blinding flash of emerald light. Lyra felt a presence in her mind, alien, ancient, and unspeakably powerful. It rifled through her thoughts like pages in a book, extracting information about the fleet, its capabilities, its intentions. Through the mental link, Lyra sensed, rather than saw, what was happening above. The orbital bombardment had destroyed much of New Chicago, but the attack had triggered a global response from the defense network. Every spire on the planet was now active, generating a psychic null field that engulfed the entire Imperial fleet. Ships were spinning out of control as their crews succumbed to hallucinations and madness. Systems failed as the null field disrupted energy patterns. The mighty Imperator, which had been leading the bombardment, was now drifting helplessly, its crew incapacitated. Lyra fought against the presence in her mind, drawing on her Imperial training in mental resistance. Beside her, Tarek and Janice were on their knees, overwhelmed by the psychic assault. "We have to stop this," Lyra gasped, "or the entire fleet will be destroyed." With tremendous effort, she reached for her weapon, a standard-issue Imperial pulse rifle. The psychic presence in her mind reacted with alarm, tightening its grip on her consciousness. Lyra's vision blurred, and horrific images flashed before her eyes, her worst fears made manifest. She saw her homeworld burning, her family dying, the Empire crumbling to dust. She saw herself failing, again and again, in every mission she had ever undertaken. "Not real," she ground out through clenched teeth. "Not going to break me." With a supreme effort of will, Lyra raised her rifle and fired at the base of the central spire, where the circuitry patterns were most concentrated. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The spire emitted a shriek that existed not in air, but in mind, a psychic scream of pain and rage that dropped Lyra to her knees. The blue glow of the circuitry flared to blinding intensity, then began to flicker and fade. But as the psychic presence withdrew from Lyra's mind, something else took its place, a warning, a final message from the dying system. "You have awakened the Wardens. They will come." The cavern began to collapse around them. Massive chunks of stone fell from the ceiling as the earth above, weakened by the orbital bombardment, gave way. "Run!" Lyra shouted, grabbing Tarek and Janice by their arms. They stumbled toward the staircase, dodging falling debris. Behind them, the damaged spire continued to pulse, but erratically now, its rhythm broken. As they reached the stairs, Lyra glanced back to see something emerging from the failing light of the spire. Shadowy figures, humanoid, but not human, their forms shifting and indistinct. The wardens. They fled up the staircase as the cavern collapsed completely behind them. When they emerged into the ruined church, they found a city transformed by destruction. The orbital bombardment had reduced much of New Chicago to rubble. Fires burned everywhere, and the air was thick with smoke and the cries of the injured. "We need to help them," Tarek said immediately, looking at the human survivors stumbling through the ruins. Lyra nodded. "We will, but first, we need to contact the fleet." Their communications equipment, protected from the psychic field by the collapse of the central spire, was functional again. Lyra established contact with the Vanguard and was relieved to hear that while many ships had been damaged and casualties were high, the fleet had survived. Admiral Rao, however, had not. The Imperator had suffered a catastrophic reactor breach when its crew, driven mad by the psychic assault, had attempted emergency maneuvers beyond the ship's capabilities. Over the next several hours, Lyra's team worked alongside human survivors, providing medical aid and helping to rescue those trapped in collapsed buildings. The humans were understandably wary at first, but necessity overcame fear, and a tentative cooperation emerged. Through Tarek's translations, Lyra learned more about Earth's history with the spires. They had always been there, objects of worship and fear. Different human cultures had built their sacred places around them, sensing their power without understanding it. Only in times of celestial danger did they activate. Most recently, when the Sharn had attempted colonization centuries earlier. As night fell over the ruined city, Lyra's team made camp in a relatively intact structure. They had just established a secure perimeter when Janice's scanner began emitting an urgent alert. "Energy signatures," she reported, studying the readout. "Similar to the spire, but moving. Multiple contacts, closing from all directions." Lyra readied her weapon. "The wardens!" They emerged from the shadows between buildings, tall, shifting forms that seemed to flicker in and out of visibility. Not quite solid. Not quite spectral. Their features were indistinct except for their eyes, glowing points of the same emerald light that had emanated from the spire. Lyra raised her rifle, but before she could fire, one of the wardens raised a hand. A voice spoke directly into her mind, not in words, but in concepts, emotions, images. "We are the final defense. You have damaged the network, but not destroyed it. We come to assess, to judge." "We mean no harm to Earth," Lyra responded aloud, knowing they would understand her intent, if not her words. "The attack was a mistake, one I tried to prevent." The lead warden approached, its form solidifying slightly as it drew nearer. It reached out and touched Lyra's forehead with what felt like fingers made of cold fire. Images flooded her mind. Earth as it was billions of years ago, when the spires were first grown by beings unimaginably ancient and powerful. The world had been seeded with life and intelligence, then abandoned as its creators moved on to other realms of existence. But they had left behind guardians, the spire network and the dormant wardens, to protect their experiment until it reached fruition. The Sharn had discovered Earth and attempted colonization, ignoring ancient warnings, much as the Empire had done. They had been destroyed utterly. Their civilization collapsed by the psychic backlash of attacking the central spire. Now the Empire stood at the same crossroads. The warden withdrew its touch, and Lyra gasped as the connection broke. She understood now what was at stake, not just the fleet, but potentially the entire Empire if they continued their aggression against Earth. "What do you want from us?" she asked the warden. The response came as a series of impressions. Departure, isolation, protection, time for the experiment to continue undisturbed. Lyra nodded slowly. "I understand. I will convey your message to my people." The wardens withdrew as silently as they had appeared, melting back into the shadows between worlds. Lyra immediately contacted the Vanguard, now under the command of Captain Devrel, following Rao's death. "Captain," she said, I am issuing an emergency directive under Imperial Security Protocol 937. The Sol system is to be quarantined immediately. No further landing attempts are to be made. The fleet is to withdraw to a minimum safe distance of 5 astronomical units. There was a moment of stunned silence before Devril responded. Commander, that protocol requires explanation. Earth possesses a defense system beyond our capability to overcome, Lyra replied. It has already destroyed one civilization that attempted invasion, and it will destroy us if we persist. I have encountered its guardians directly. They demand our withdrawal. To his credit, Devril didn't argue further. Understood, Commander. Quarantine protocols are being implemented. What about your team? We'll be departing as soon as we've provided what assistance we can to the human survivors of our attack, Lyra said. Prepare a full report for Imperial High Command. The Sol system must be declared permanently restricted. For the next 2 days, Lyra's team worked alongside the humans of New Chicago, helping to establish temporary shelters and treat the injured. It was clear that while the orbital bombardment had been devastating, the city would rebuild. Human resilience was impressive. On the final evening before their scheduled departure, Lyra stood on a hillside overlooking the damaged city. Lights flickered among the ruins as reconstruction efforts continued through the night. Tarek joined her, his expression thoughtful. I've been analyzing the Jarn transmissions again, he said. In light of what we now know, their final messages take on new meaning. They weren't just warning about Earth's defenses. They were acknowledging their own hubris in ignoring the warnings they themselves had received from earlier civilizations. A cycle of arrogance, Lyra murmured. Each species believing its technology and power make it exceptional, immune to the fate of those who came before. The Empire is no different, Tarek said. How do you think High Command will respond to our report? Lyra considered this. Imperial doctrine emphasized expansion, conquest, the inexorable march of progress. To declare an entire star system off limits due to an alien defense system would be unprecedented. They won't like it, she admitted. But the evidence is irrefutable. And with the backup data we've collected on the Spire network and the Wardens, they'll have to acknowledge the threat. And if they don't, Tarek pressed. If they order another expedition? Lyra's expression hardened. Then I will do everything in my power to prevent it. Some boundaries aren't meant to be crossed. Some worlds aren't meant to be conquered. The journey back to the Vanguard was uneventful. As their shuttle docked in the main hangar, Lyra was surprised to see a full honor guard waiting to receive them, a courtesy usually reserved for returning admirals, not commanders who had effectively aborted a major Imperial operation. Captain Devril stepped forward as they disembarked. Commander Voss, he said formally, your actions have saved this fleet from destruction. The evidence you've provided regarding Earth's defense system has been transmitted to Imperial High Command. They have confirmed your quarantine order. Relief washed over Lyra. Thank you, Captain. I'm gratified that reason has prevailed. There's more, Devril continued. You're being promoted to the rank of Admiral, effective immediately. High Command believes your perspective on first contact protocols may be valuable in preventing similar incidents in the future. Lyra exchanged glances with Tarek and Janice. This was unexpected, a vindication of her caution, and a rare admission from the Empire that its aggressive expansion policies might need reconsideration. Later, alone in her quarters, Lyra recorded her final log entry regarding Earth. The Sol system has been officially designated as Restricted Zone 117, with approach prohibited under penalty of immediate execution. Beacons broadcasting warnings in all major galactic languages have been deployed at 1 light-year intervals around the system. Earth represents a unique case in Imperial exploration, a world that cannot be conquered through conventional means. Protected by technology we cannot comprehend, and guardians we cannot defeat. But perhaps more importantly, it represents a valuable lesson in humility for an empire that has grown accustomed to unopposed expansion. The ancient Sharn ignored warnings and paid the ultimate price. We nearly followed the same path. How many other civilizations have made similar mistakes throughout the galaxy's long history? How many have fallen to their own arrogance? As I assume my new responsibilities as Admiral, I will carry this lesson with me. True strength lies not in conquest, but in understanding, not in domination, but in respect for the boundaries and sovereignty of others, even those vastly different from ourselves. The Empire has always prided itself on bringing order to chaos, civilization to barbarism. But Earth has shown us that there are some worlds that need neither our order nor our civilization. Some experiments must be allowed to unfold on their own terms, without interference. Earth will continue on its path, its human inhabitants likely unaware of how close they came to becoming collateral damage in an imperial campaign. Perhaps someday, they will develop the technology to leave their world and join the galactic community on their own terms. Until then, we will watch from afar, and we will remember the price of ignoring ancient warnings. Lyra ended the recording and turned to the viewport. The Vanguard and the remaining fleet vessels were already accelerating away from the Sol system, leaving Earth behind, a small, blue-green dot dwindling in the vast darkness of space. She thought of the Wardens, ancient guardians of a world seeded with life billions of years ago. She thought of the humans, rebuilding their city, unaware of the cosmic forces that had shaped their history and protected their future. And she thought of Admiral Rao and all those who had died because of imperial arrogance, lives lost in pursuit of resources that, in the grand scheme of the galaxy, were hardly unique or irreplaceable. The Empire would find other worlds, other resources. It would continue to expand, as was its nature. But perhaps now, with the lesson of Earth freshly imprinted on its collective consciousness, it would do so with greater caution and respect. As for Lyra herself, she had a new mission now, to ensure that the Empire learned from this encounter, that the warnings about Earth were heeded, and that future first contacts were approached with diplomacy rather than dominance. It was a mission worthy of an admiral, perhaps the most important mission of all,